May 28, 1940, Reich Air Ministry, Berlin. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring tossed aside the intelligence report with visible disdain. The document described President Roosevelt's request to Congress for a vast expansion of American aircraft production, a plan to manufacture 50,000 planes per year. Göring scoffed. "The Americans are desperate if they believe such propaganda will frighten us," he told his officers. "They know nothing about war production. Let them try to convert their automobile factories. They'll learn that building aircraft requires far more than an assembly line." What Göring failed to understand was that, even then, in Detroit, a Danish immigrant named William Knudsen was already proving him wrong. The former General Motors president, who had left a $300,000 a year position to work for Roosevelt for just $1 annually, was orchestrating the most ambitious industrial transformation in history. Within 4 years, American factories would not only reach Roosevelt's impossible goal, but would double it, producing nearly 100,000 aircraft each year while supplying armies across 2 oceans. Roosevelt's declaration, which had been met with derision in Berlin, came on May 16, 1940, as German panzers were sweeping through France. Addressing Congress, Roosevelt declared, "I should like to see this nation geared up to the ability to turn out at least 50,000 planes a year." Even America's allies thought it fanciful. In 1939, U.S. factories had produced only 3,611 military aircraft. The Army Air Corps had barely 1,700 combat planes, most of them obsolete. Yet Roosevelt was demanding a 14-fold increase in production. When Roosevelt's advisor Bernard Baruch was asked who could possibly accomplish this, he replied, "First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen." The man who had helped build the automotive age would now reforge America into the arsenal of democracy. He brought assembly line logic to aviation standardization, mass production, and organization on a scale no one had attempted for aircraft. By December 1941, only 2 years later, American factories were turning out 2,000 military aircraft every month, a 20-fold increase over pre-war levels. The Ford Motor Company announced the construction of a massive bomber plant at Willow Run, Michigan. Boeing expanded its Seattle works. Douglas Aircraft hired tens of thousands of workers. The sleeping giant of American industry was stirring. Yet in Berlin, Nazi leadership continued to sneer. Their contempt was rooted in racial arrogance and strategic blindness. General Friedrich von Bötticher, the German military attaché in Washington, from 1933 to 1941, sent accurate reports describing the mobilization underway in America. His December 1940 dispatch warned, "American war production will reach unimaginable heights." Berlin dismissed his message as defeatist. When Bötticher met Hitler in early 1939 to discuss U.S. potential, the Führer flew into a tirade about racial degeneration instead of listening to his intelligence officer. "Americans are half Judaized, half negrified," Hitler ranted, "and incapable of sustained warfare. Such ideological delusions would doom them." The prejudice was so pervasive that even the Luftwaffe's intelligence officers mocked reports of women entering aircraft factories as signs of desperation. They could not imagine that democratic mobilization, voluntary, open, and innovative might outmatched totalitarian command. When German analysts read reports of American factories running 3 shifts, they assumed the numbers were falsified. Their worldview simply could not comprehend the scale or speed of what was happening across the Atlantic. Ford's Willow Run bomber plant would become the symbol of that transformation. Built on farmland beginning in April 1941, it became the largest factory in the world, 5 million square feet under one roof, with an assembly line over a mile long. Ford's production chief Charles Sorensen vowed to build 1 B-24 Liberator bomber per hour when most factories managed only 1 per day. The early results were grim. The first bomber, finished in September 1942, had to be completely rebuilt. Half the aircraft produced were rejected for defects. By February 1943, Willow Run was turning out only 56 bombers a month instead of hundreds. Critics joked, "Will it run?" But Ford engineers refused to give up. They broke the B-24's 408,193 parts into modular subassemblies. They developed hydraulic riveting tools, prefabricated wiring harnesses, and moving assembly systems. In 1943 alone, they absorbed 578 design changes while keeping production going. By September that year, output had climbed to 148 bombers per month. By December, 365. In April 1944, Willow Run hit its peak. 428 bombers in a single month completed every 63 minutes around the clock. One factory was now producing more aircraft than the entire German aviation industry. German pilots began to see the results in the skies. During the Tunisia campaign in late 1942, Luftwaffe ace Johannes Steinhoff reported, "The American pilots are no longer amateurs. Most disturbing of all, there are more of them every day." By early 1943, U.S. air raids over Europe multiplied. On January 27th, American bombers struck Germany itself for the first time. By October, during Black Thursday over Schweinfurt, the U.S. Army Air Forces lost 60 bombers, yet replaced them within 2 weeks. The math was now undeniable. During Big Week in February 1944, the 8th and 15th Air Forces launched 3,500 bomber sorties targeting German aircraft factories. The Luftwaffe lost up to 355 fighters and nearly 100 of its most experienced pilots. General Adolf Galland reported to Göring that Germany was losing 1,200 fighters per month while producing only 1,000. America was building 2,500 fighters monthly and losing 400. The war of attrition was unwinnable. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's leading aces with over 200 victories, recalled a mission in January 1944 over Brunswick. The bomber stream stretched from horizon to horizon, at least 700 flying fortresses and liberators. We were 8 fighters against hundreds. It was hopeless. By 1944, U.S. aircraft production reached astonishing levels. That year alone, American factories produced 96 170 planes, 16,000 heavy bombers, 35,700 fighters, 20,500 twin-engine aircraft, and thousands more trainers and transports. That single year's production exceeded Germany's entire output for the entire war, which totaled around 94,000 aircraft. And it wasn't just quantity. Each American bomber carried 13 50-caliber machine guns. German fighters, short on ammunition, often launched with only partial loads. American bombers boasted powered turrets, advanced bomb sights, and precision navigation instruments. German aircraft were increasingly flying with faulty radios and makeshift repairs. Boeing's Plant No. 2 in Seattle was producing 16 B-17s every day by mid-1944. Douglas Aircraft, which had employed just 68 people in 1936, now had 167,000 workers across 9 factories. North American Aviation built 500 P-51 Mustangs monthly. Lockheed rolled out 1 P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes. Even supporting industries kept pace. General Motors produced 57,000 aircraft engines. Packard built over 55,000 Rolls-Royce Merlins. Alcoa's aluminum output rose 600%. Dow Chemical's magnesium production grew from 6 million to 333 million pounds annually. The transformation of the workforce stunned Germany even more than the machines themselves. In 1941, women made up less than 1% of aircraft workers. By 1943, they were 65%. Over 310,000 women were employed in the aircraft industry. At Douglas's Long Beach plant, more than half the workforce was female. Rosie the Riveter, real name Roseville Monroe, drove 3,000 rivets per shift at Willow Run with 99.5% precision. Female inspectors at Douglas reduced defect rates tenfold. Ford redesigned tools for smaller hands, unintentionally improving ergonomics and efficiency. German intelligence interpreted the influx of women as a sign of desperation. A captured Luftwaffe report sneered that quality would collapse. Instead, it improved dramatically. Women proved exceptionally skilled at precision work wiring, instrumentation, inspection. What the Nazis viewed as weakness became a democratic advantage. As American production surged, Germany descended into chaos. Göring, panicked by the collapse of his air force, authorized the Jaeger program in February 1944. an emergency plan to disperse aircraft production across hundreds of underground sites to protect them from bombing. In practice, it was a disaster. Factories were scattered across 729 underground complexes, manned largely by slave labor. At the Mittelwerk facility, 60,000 prisoners toiled under horrific conditions. 20,000 died building V-2 rockets and aircraft components. The dispersed system crippled coordination. Transportation delays between sites caused endless bottlenecks, quality control collapsed, and sabotage by the enslaved workers was rampant. The entire Mittelwerk complex produced fewer usable engines each month than Ford's single Chicago plant. Meanwhile, American innovation only accelerated. Boeing pioneered modular construction for the new B-29 Superfortress, with components built at 4 facilities and assembled with complete interchangeability. The pressurized B-29, costing $65,000 each, embodied technologies Germany hadn't yet mastered even in prototype form. By early 1945, America was producing 100 B-29s per month. The results of this industrial supremacy became unmistakable on June 6, 1944. The D-Day invasion force employed 11,590 Allied aircraft against just 319 German sorties, a staggering 36-to-1 advantage. This was not simply air superiority, it was industrial annihilation. Between January and May 1944, Allied air forces dropped 145,000 tons of bombs on German targets, more than all German bombing of Britain during the entire war. Transport aircraft carried 3 airborne divisions into Normandy in a single day, using more planes than Germany's entire transport fleet had ever possessed. By late 1944, single Allied raids involved 200 bombers, escorted by 900 fighters. The P-51 Mustang, with its long range and high performance, could now escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. German pilots called them Indians, swarming the skies like ghosts. By December 1944, even Nazi leaders began acknowledging the truth. Joseph Goebbels wrote in his diary, "Göring's promises of Luftwaffe superiority now seem criminally delusional. We fight the world's greatest industrial power with rhetoric." Field Marshal Rommel told his staff before D-Day, "The Americans can lose 10 tanks for every one we destroy and still overwhelm us. When they land, they will come with such material superiority that no position can hold." Even Hitler, in one of his final private admissions to Albert Speer in early 1945, confessed, "We should have listened to Boetticher's reports. Their industrial potential was decisive. While we built hundreds, they built tens of thousands." Speer later testified that American bombing reduced German tank production by 35%, aircraft by 31%, and trucks by 42%. "The Americans attacked according to a system," he said, "and that system broke our armaments industry." Germany's Me-262 jet fighter, introduced in mid-1944, represented genuine technological brilliance, 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied aircraft. Göring and Hitler hailed it as the miracle weapon that would turn the tide. But in total, only 1,030 were built, with rarely more than 200 operational at any time. The jet engines required overhauls after just 10 hours of flight, and shortages of critical alloys forced engineers to use inferior substitutes. While Germany bet on a handful of wonder weapons, America invested in systems. It had already begun jet development in 1942. Although its first model, the Bell P-59, proved underwhelming, the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, superior to any German jet, entered production before the war's end. American industrial depth allowed the pursuit of multiple technologies simultaneously, something Germany could no longer afford. The contrast defined the outcome. German quality could not compensate for American quantity, nor could isolated technological leaps overcome total industrial dominance. In total war, quality without quantity was meaningless. When American forces captured Hermann Göring on May 8, 1945, the Reichsmarschall still clung to arrogance. He was interrogated at Augsburg by U.S. officers, maintaining that Germany's superior technology had been defeated only by American numbers. But as he was moved to Camp Ashkan in Luxembourg for detailed interrogation, his confidence began to erode. Major Kenneth Hechler, an American intelligence officer, recorded Göring's changing tone in July 1945. Göring admitted, I knew American industrial potential was great, but the execution exceeded my worst fears. That single factory at Willow Run produced more aircraft than our entire bomber force at its peak. It was incomprehensible. He spoke with awe about American logistics. Your ability to supply forces across 2 oceans while maintaining domestic production. We could not imagine such a thing. We struggled to supply forces 500 miles from Germany. You supplied armies 5,000 miles from America. At the Nuremberg trials, prosecutors confronted Göring with hard data. Charts showing that by 1944 the United States was producing more aircraft in a month than Germany did in a year. Films of the Willow Run assembly line played while lists of bombed German cities were read aloud. Göring sat in silence. During his testimony on March 14, 1946, Göring admitted, "I always believed the economic and technical potential of the United States to be great, particularly in the air. But I never imagined they could increase aircraft production 100-fold in 4 years. Such growth seemed physically impossible." Psychologist Gustave Gilbert, who observed Göring daily, noted his obsession with production statistics. The former Luftwaffe chief would spend hours scribbling ratios, comparing single American factories to the entire German industry. He was particularly haunted by Willow Run, referring to it as that damned factory that broke our backs. When shown figures that the U.S. had produced 812,000 aircraft engines compared to Germany's 241,000, Göring simply stared in silence. The numbers told a story he could no longer deny. By war's end, America had produced 295,959 military aircraft, 97,110 bombers, 99,465 fighters, and nearly 100,000 others. Germany's total stood at 94,677. The U.S. had outbuilt its enemy more than 3-1 while fighting on 2 major fronts. But the achievement went beyond numbers. It represented a systemic revolution in industrial organization. Over 2 million Americans worked in aircraft production at its peak, drawn from every background imaginable: women, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, people with disabilities, teenagers, and retirees. This diversity, unthinkable in Nazi Germany, became one of democracy's greatest strengths. The workforce that had entered the factories in 1941, knowing nothing of aviation, left in 1945 as the most skilled industrial labor force in the world. They didn't just build planes, they transformed manufacturing itself. Statistical quality control, automation, and modular production, all pioneered during bomber manufacturing, became permanent foundations of modern industry. The same engineers who designed bomber assembly lines would later help design the Saturn V rocket. The same women who riveted B-24s would raise the generation that walked on the moon. The financial dimensions of the production miracle were staggering. Aircraft manufacturing alone cost $45 billion in 1940s dollars, roughly $800 billion today. The B-29 program by itself exceeded the cost of the Manhattan Project. Yet far from bankrupting the nation, the effort created prosperity. Unemployment vanished. Personal incomes doubled between 1940 and 1945. Workers financed much of the war effort themselves through savings bonds. Employees at Willow Run alone bought $45 million in bonds to fund their own factory's expansion. Germany, in contrast, consumed nearly half its industrial output on aircraft production by 1944, yet achieved less than half of America's results. The slave labor system it relied upon was not only inhumane, but disastrously inefficient. Sabotage was constant, quality plummeted, and productivity per worker declined sharply after 1943, while American output per worker tripled. The infrastructure built for war became the backbone of post-war prosperity. Aluminum plants that had smelted metal for bombers now produced materials for housing. Chemical factories that refined aviation fuel began making plastics for consumer goods. Machine tool plants converted to civilian manufacturing, powering an economic boom that would define the American century. Beyond sheer production lay something deeper, an organizational brilliance that no totalitarian state could match. The War Production Board coordinated 184,000 companies with near-perfect efficiency. IBM punch card systems tracked millions of parts across thousands of suppliers. MIT's radiation laboratory, employing 4,000 scientists, developed the radar and navigation systems that gave American bombers all-weather precision. When combat exposed weaknesses, American manufacturers adapted instantly. Boeing added new Chin turrets to the B-17 within 60 days after learning of German frontal attacks. When the Pacific War demanded longer-range aircraft, Consolidated modified B-24s accordingly, without halting production. In contrast, German design changes often took months or years due to bureaucracy and material shortages. This adaptability, the ability to learn and improve continuously, was as decisive as raw numbers. Combat data flowed back to American factories within days. Engineers redesigned components, and new versions rolled off assembly lines almost immediately. Workers themselves suggested innovations, which management implemented with remarkable speed. This democratic feedback loop of ideas was something no dictatorship could reproduce. Information traveled through the American system with unprecedented speed. Combat pilots' reports from Europe or the Pacific reached engineers in days, sometimes hours. New fixes were incorporated directly into designs, and production lines implemented them without stopping. Assembly workers' suggestions often reached management and engineers the same week. This democratic exchange of ideas, bottom-up as well as top-down, became one of America's hidden advantages. It replaced rigid orders with continuous adaptation. In Nazi Germany, by contrast, production had become paralyzed by fear and hierarchy. Engineers who proposed changes risked punishment if results delayed production. Slave laborers could not communicate with their overseers, and even senior officers hesitated to contradict Göring or Speer. The result was stagnation. While American aircraft evolved month by month, German planes remained largely static after 1943. By 1945, the outcome was mathematically certain. American factories were producing as many aircraft engines every 6 weeks as Germany managed in an entire year. The Luftwaffe's legendary pilots, from Galland to Steinhoff, were forced to admit that courage could no longer compensate for numbers. Germany's best fighter, the Me-262, arrived too late, and in too few numbers to matter. As the Reich collapsed, Göring's world shrank from the marble halls of Berlin to a single cell at Nuremberg. There, faced with charts and films of the factories he had once mocked, the former Reichsmarschall finally confronted the truth. On October 15, 1946, just hours before his scheduled execution, Göring wrote his final letter. In it, he made his most complete confession. The Americans won through industrial power, not military prowess. We were not defeated by better soldiers, but by better factories. The nation we dismissed as capable only of building consumer goods buried the Wehrmacht under aluminum and steel. To prison psychologist Gustav Gilbert, he offered a final, bitter reflection. We declared war on an industrial giant while it slept. When it awoke, we were doomed. They didn't just outproduce us, they revolutionized production itself. Every aspect of their system proved superior. That night, Göring took his own life, escaping the gallows, but not history's judgment. His death symbolized the final collapse of the Nazi illusion that tyranny and ideology could surpass the energy of a free people. Military historians now consider the American production miracle one of the decisive factors of the Allied victory. Without it, D-Day would have been impossible, the bombing campaign unsustainable, and the Pacific War unwinnable. The British historian Richard Overy summarized it bluntly. The outcome was determined not by fighting spirit or tactical brilliance, but by the weight of material. The Allies won because they buried their enemies under an avalanche of production. By 1944, the United States alone was producing more military aircraft than all other nations combined, Axis and Allied. It wasn't a narrow advantage, it was an industrial order of magnitude. Germany's defeat wasn't just military, it was existential. Its system could no longer sustain itself against the organized creativity of a democratic society. Yet the true significance of the production miracle transcended war. It demonstrated, for the first time, that democracy could mobilize as efficiently as dictatorship and do so without sacrificing freedom. It proved that, voluntary cooperation could outproduce forced labor, that diversity could outperform racial purity, that innovation born of freedom was stronger than any command born of fear. Every bomber that rolled off an American line represented that truth. Each B-24 assembled at Willow Run, every P-51 Mustang forged in California, every B-29 launched from Kansas, was a declaration that democracy could not only fight tyranny, but outbuild it. The statistics are staggering, but the meaning lies in the people behind them. 2 million Americans worked in aircraft production at the war's peak. They were farmers' sons, housewives, immigrants, and factory hands. They came from every race and background. Women who had never worked outside the home became expert machinists and inspectors. Black and Mexican-American workers who had faced discrimination entered industries that would never again shut them out. Teenagers joined the lines after school. Retired engineers returned from retirement to teach rivet patterns and tolerances. Together, they formed the largest and most productive industrial workforce in human history. And they did it not under coercion, but through pride and purpose. Roosevelt's arsenal of democracy was more than a slogan. It was a collective act of faith. When William Grusin left his fortune behind to work for $1 a year, he set the tone for a nation that would subordinate comfort to necessity, profit to principle. Millions followed that example. The result was a mobilization so vast that it redrew the global balance of power. From 3,611 military aircraft in 1940 to nearly 300,000, by 1945 an 80-fold increase, the United States demonstrated what industrial democracy could achieve under pressure. Germany's 94,000 total, once the envy of Europe, now looked small and desperate in comparison. Yet the real victory lay not in numbers, but in method. The war's greatest lesson was that free workers could outperform slaves, that open societies could innovate faster than dictatorships, that flexibility and trust could accomplish what fear and violence could not. The bombers rolling off Willow Run every hour were more than machines, they were a message. Each rivet driven by a woman who had been a homemaker months before, each engine assembled by a teenager who had left school to help win the war, each wing completed by a mechanic who had once been denied a job because of his race, all stood as symbols of freedom's power. By the end, Hermann Göring's laughter, the contemptuous sneer that had greeted Roosevelt's challenge in 1940, had become the echo of his own defeat. The man who had mocked American production capacity died knowing that one democratic factory had outbuilt his entire Luftwaffe. The transformation from 3,000 to 100,000 aircraft per year became one of history's most astonishing achievements. It was not merely an industrial record. It was a moral triumph. It proved that free people, united by necessity and belief in their cause, could overcome tyranny by the strength of their minds and hands. In the end, Göring's story mirrors the fate of the Reich itself: arrogance, disbelief, collapse, and confession. His scorn for Roosevelt's 50,000 planes had sounded like victory in 1940. By 1944, it was a joke told among American factory workers as they built twice that number. The arsenal of democracy buried fascism beneath mountains of steel, aluminum, and courage. It redefined war, reshaped industry, and launched the technological age that would follow. The production miracle was more than a victory. It was the foundation of modern America. The world that emerged from 1945 was built by those factories and the people who filled them. From the assembly lines that produced the B-24 came the systems that would later build the jet age, the space program, and the digital revolution. The engineers of Willow Run became architects of post-war manufacturing. The women of Douglas and Boeing became symbols of equality. The union of industry and democracy became the template for the modern world. Hermann Göring's laughter had once filled the marble halls of Berlin. 5 years later, it was gone, replaced by the roar of thousands of American engines over Europe, the sound of his miscalculation made real. America had not only met Roosevelt's challenge, it had doubled it, transforming disbelief into destiny. The Reichsmarschall, who once ridiculed the idea of 50,000 planes, lived to see America build more than 100,000 per year.